And assessment, our favourite task, our favourite topic, looking at holistic and authentic. Jeff, in one of his presentations a couple of weeks ago, talked about big tasks. And the ones in these two case studies are just great for that again. Really big, meaningful tasks that the students can use to apply all of the learning they've had through their program. But this focused on a process, not just a product. And that's really where it's very, oh, here we go, I did introduce Biggs. I thought I'd taken him out because of concern about the time. But yes, the idea of the process as well as just the outcome, not these little artefacts that are handed in at the end of the unit, really a push to thinking about what journey the student has been on during that integration process. So just very quickly, Capstone opportunities. A program-wide approach, as I've been hinting about earlier on. So introducing things in earlier units, first-year units, second-year units, so that they can be refined and honed in the final year units. Supporting things like teamwork and communication early on. If you're going to teach students everything they need to know about communication in this last unit, it puts even more pressure on the amount of content you can fit in. So thinking about the whole program as an opportunity. Varied assessment strategies such as report writing or design outputs, and authentic tasks. Now, this last slide is just a little bit of a snapshot from one of the resources I've mentioned earlier. So what can we do to think about assessing the process and the product? Getting students to work on a case study, getting them to write a research grant proposal based on an authentic sort of need, a feasibility study report, a research report on some sort of a group project, you'll see those examples later, a plan for a program of activities, some communiques or presentations. Now this is where, Janice, your comment about the oral presentations comes in. So you can think about an authentic presentation requirement and then set up the assessment strategy accordingly, because that at least is a bit more forward-looking to what the students might need to do when they come out, rather than just standing up and talking about the stuff they read in Chapter 5. And an integrated portfolio. Now, just going over to the chat, Jeff says assessment being effective as well as effective is important. And that's very true. Our big push here about encouraging undergraduate participation in research, a lot of that is about engagement and really encouraging students to become involved in big projects because they're interesting and they're fun and they can really enable them to be a bit creative. We could have a whole another 2 hours discussion about the difficulties and challenges of assessing creativity, only because people think that it's not necessarily part of their discipline areas. But getting students involved in research can be really creative, whatever the discipline is. So that's a really exciting aspect of this, I think, that whole engagement and getting students to work on big tasks that are interesting and fun. So I'll stop there and hand over for people. Oh, sorry, here's Matthew saying big projects teach a lot of the soft skills. Yeah, exactly. All of those integration issues. And it's much easier from our experience here to get students to really collaborate rather than just cooperate if they've got a big task to work on. And I know, Jeff, you were talking about this. We've had a similar issue where if you give students a task that doesn't really require collaboration, then the temptation is they can just divide it up between them and each operate on a little different part of it. And it isn't really a true collaboration that really brings out the best of synergies between them. So yes, you're right there. And designing the task is, thinking about how you're going to design them and then how you're going to assess them. Yes, as you say, Mary Jane, really looking at what outcomes you're going to put together and the notion of standards and rubrics and those sorts of things to support those assessment processes. And that also helps students. I guess underlying all of these comments is that literature that we have from people like David Dowd talking about how if your students have had really individualised assessment tasks all the way through, and you try and get them to do a really cool big project in their final year unit, they're going to be very threatened by that. So in some ways, as Barb says, the sort of bad experiences with previous assessment tasks can kind of wreck them and be all really good, interesting, innovative ones. So that's where a program approach can be really good, to try and introduce these ideas along the way. So I'll stop talking there and just hand over, because I'm sure there are some people who'd like the mic. So yeah, just jump on in.
Okay, just wanted to make a comment, Jeff here. Just wanted to make a comment about the idea of designing tasks is perhaps not the most difficult thing. I suppose from a lot of what I've seen, it is actually a very difficult thing. It's very easy to design an assessment task. It's very difficult to design an effective and appropriate assessment task. And I think that's where certainly we struggle a lot, because I think the amount of time that it takes to design an appropriate assessment task is actually at least as much as in, preparing your content, delivering the content, and all those other things that you do. And I think that's where a lot of teachers struggle, because there's just not enough hours in the day to be able to prepare content, deliver it, organise all the things you have to do, then actually have to organise really interesting, appropriate, complex, integrated assessment tasks for students. So I think really we need to think about that whole point about when do we design assessment tasks. And assessment tasks should actually be part of the original curriculum design, and people really need to think about those, about the time spent on those different components. Now, I'm not saying I've got any easy answer to this, because it's difficult to generate those extra hours that we need to do that. But certainly the whole process around curriculum design needs to have assessment at the front end, not at the back end.
Yes, I agree, Jeff. In fact, I think that we used to joke that that should be the starting point before anyone even thought about any of the teaching activities and the other typical things like lecture content. But your comments also encouraged me to think about the time issue that Mary Jane is commenting on as well, about pulling out some of the content. So these two examples that I'm going to talk about, they really have worked at pulling out some of that content so that they can make some space to do the very things you're talking about, Jeff. So for instance, if they need to write a report, especially one of them, the first one I'll talk about, Debbie says that she needs to make space to talk through that and scaffold students through that process, rather than spending so much time talking about all this new content. She's pulled some of that out, and that's where the program approach can be really handy. So I'll hand over now to Ursula, who also has a comment.